cliche items in the store. So we walked in and it was full of like dream catchers and feathers. And she was like, my daughter was 4 or 5 or 6 at the time. And she's like, look at all of these savages in this store. And that was the moment that I realized I need to talk to her about who she is.
And we are live. So, hi everybody. I'm Tiara, and today this Melanated discussion panel is going to be about the Native American perspective in America. First and foremost, I want to thank you guys for taking the time out to even do this, because I know these conversations can be kind of uncomfortable or scary to have. You never know who's going to end up seeing certain things. So I understand that most people may not want to even have these type of conversations. And so just thank you for being here. And I would just like to say, I want to dive directly into it. So if you guys are ready, I'm ready. You guys ready to go?
Yes.
Cool. So first question for you guys is race an issue in the US?
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Okay, and so since you guys are saying absolutely it's an issue, are Native people specifically treated differently in the US? And if so, how so?
Yes, definitely. I think, I guess from my own personal experience, on our reservation, natives are looked at as for specifically border towns. I was just telling Melanie about this. I had forgot about this, but, even on our own reservation, we see racism. We got that stereotype that we're alcoholics. So there's a border town that I grew up in named Winslow, Arizona. I've experienced it. It's like this Native American woman's coming in. While making my way back, back in my drinking days, I could stop in the liquor store and go grab some liquor, and right away I notice it. Like, I'm getting side eye. I walked in one time and, I was like 2 tall cans, case of beer, and the lady was like, no, you choose one. You get one thing. And
Wow.
I'm like, okay. I didn't see a sign anywhere saying that we were limited. And so, I just kind of got that attitude. I was embarrassed, of course. And, in my head, I'm like, okay, maybe I shouldn't be drinking this much. You know what I mean? Like I second guessed myself. And, just that kind of treatment already, that judgment's like already there. It's almost, it's like almost normal. So.
Wow.
Yeah, we see a lot of that. Would you guys agree on, like, especially with border towns? And
because I think the racism in border towns have increased due to COVID-19 restrictions and the especially on our reservation needing to travel to border towns usually to get the supplies and necessities that is needed, and because there is a high increase of positive test results that it's adding to that negative stigma that it is our fault or we shouldn't cross into a border town. So I think that adds to it. And when I think about racism in Native Americans, I think about invisibility. Like, we are still invisible. Not a lot of people have a good idea of what life is like today in year 2020 to be Native American, and specifically Navajo. We still kind of live under the shadow of stereotypes and often told to get over it, right? We have things that was provided for us. We have the medical care, we have the land, we have casinos, we have things that were given or provided or offered to us to utilize to be as sovereign as we can, but there's still needs within those needs. And when we express those needs, it's still considered invisible or maybe not up to par as other issues among the different people in this country.
I hear you. When you mentioned being invisible, I actually had an experience where I had gone out with my husband and Carleen, and we had a picture together, and someone seen Carleen, and they're like, oh, is she Native? I was like, yeah, she is. How'd you know? And they're like, oh, wow, they still exist? And I was just like, really? Like, they said it as a joke, but to me, it wasn't a joke. Like, that was just insane to me. So I I know I'm not native, but as far as you bringing up the invisibility part, like, yeah, I actually have experience hearing someone say something so fucking ignorant. Like,
Yep. I have a story to add on to that. Just my mom. So she was dating somebody, and my mom has she has her physics degree that she earned at Northern Arizona University, and she was dating this guy. And in conversation, he was talking with his mom, and his mom was like, said something like, "Oh, Stanlene has her degree. You know, the way that your brother made it sound like she was still living in a teepee, you know." And I know I was shocked, and but yeah, that's, you know, people don't know that, you know, whether it's a joke or not, we do exist. You know, we're educated. You know, we're doing things, and yeah.
So growing up, I did go to Winslow High School. I attended school there. I went there after Carleen. Obviously, Carleen's older. And I, just looking back at it, I really didn't understand it at the time. And my English teacher, and this is probably why I disliked English so much, you know, just asking questions. She blew me off consistently, never answered any question of mine. She was Caucasian and older. Her name was, you know, Mrs. Greenwood. I'm going to put her out there because I left in my junior year. That was how much, like, Winslow just put a really bad taste in my mouth. I didn't understand it at the time. I could not put two and two together. Um, for me, Navajo was my first language. I was raised by my grandparents, my late grandparents. My mom came down to Phoenix to try to make a life for us at a later time, which eventually she did come back and bring us down here, like when I was 7. So eventually, you know, I went to public school at 2nd grade. So I entered public school having to do ESL, but I excelled. I was making honor roll, didn't have any issues. I don't remember racism being an issue. It was just diversity. And I had fun. I had a buttload of, you know, friends, you know, Hispanic friends mainly. Um, I know there were a couple Caucasian girls that I really didn't get along with. They did not like me for whatever reasons. I got into a couple fights, you know, and it, going back to Winslow, it was the same thing, you know. And I actually, before I attended Winslow again, I did go back to the boarding school out at Saba, and I was like an outcast. So it was interesting, even by my own, because I spoke different. I had a different attitude. I didn't consider myself, you know, like an urban native. I still spoke Navajo. I still could, you know, carry on a conversation because my late grandparents, all they spoke was Navajo. So it was a very interesting experience. And then attending Haskell, Indian Nations University in Lawrence, Kansas, surrounded by nothing but farmers. It's the only way you know, I'm putting it nicely. I definitely did not understand why people were still like that, but I see it. I still see it till this day. I love the experience that I offered my son. He's 12 now. Just having him be in that experience and just, you know, opening his eyes, saying this is not right. This is not how you should be treated. This is not how you need to treat others. It's different, but I thankful that I was able to do that. I'm back in Arizona. I love it still, and it's still crazy. I do experience it here, not as often. I love the diversity here. Thankfully, my son doesn't have to experience it in public schools as much as Kansas, but there's a lot of differences still. But yeah, that's what I had to go through so far.
So you're in the valley, right? Are you?
Yes, I'm back in Phoenix.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought you said. My dad is there too. He lives in Mesa, but when I knew I was going to be participating in this panel, I reached out to him just to kind of get his, input on racism, especially in Phoenix, because it's so diverse there. Like that's kind of like a hub. Like a lot of the people who move off the reservation, a lot of them you'll find are in Phoenix. They'll start off in Phoenix or Flagstaff, but he sees it there all the time. He gets hassled by the cops. The way he explained it is like, he sees it from people with power. So like hotel managers, even the bus drivers, he'll go on the bus, be shortchanged, get kicked off the bus, no slack, white person come on the bus, shortchanged. Oh yeah, come on, you're good. So he sees that all the time. So yeah, I agree that it's alive and well, even in Phoenix, where it's really diverse.
That's crazy. And Starla, I think that it's really cool that you can speak Navajo. A lot of Native people that I meet, they say that they don't know the language anymore. So I think that's really cool that you grew up and that was your first language and then you learned English afterwards. I think that's really cool.
It is. I'm very appreciative of my growing up. I mean, it's made me who I am today, regardless of all my hardships. I mean,
yeah. So you guys, I want to jump into childhood and then we're going to kind of go on a timeline from being a kid up into adulthood and how race shows up. And so I want to know, since you brought up school, do you guys remember the first time someone mentioned or pointed out that you were different or you were Native, basically that you weren't white? If you were at school with white students, has someone ever, do you remember the first time someone said, oh, you're Native or you're this? Like from my experience, I don't remember the first time I realized I was Black, but I feel like the talk with my parents happened so early on that I just knew I was Black. And the first encounter that I've had where I remember someone was pointing out that I was Black, but in a derogatory way, was my sister and I were on the bus going to school, and we had moved out to Spanaway area, so more white people than where we were living in Federal Way. And this white guy was on the bus making like monkey noises, sounds, acting like he was a monkey, and then he was calling us niggers. And my sister beat his ass on the bus. And this is on the way to school. We get to the school, the principal and the security people or whatever for the school were waiting for us once we got to school. And my sister was the only one suspended, not the white kid, even though he was the one that was calling us niggers. So like, that's the first experience that I can remember as far as like knowing that I'm Black, but like in a bad way. So I'm just curious to know, do you guys remember the first time that someone pointed out that you were Native or that you were different?
For me, growing up, I grew up on the reservation, so it was 98% native, very few minority. So that's where I was comfortable. It's very rare that we would go off the reservation, like travel to Phoenix for 6 hours away. It was very rare that happened, maybe 2 or 3 times a year. And that was the big city for me, and everything outside of the reservation was on TV. And so it wasn't until recently I was having a discussion with my sisters, and we're talking about a similar topic, that everything that I saw about outside life off of reservation was on TV, like the Hollywood, white families, the things that they do and like and interest, and movies. That was our outlet. And I was a teenage mom. I had my baby at 17, got married right away, and before even finishing high school, we moved to South Carolina. And that was my first time outside of really Arizona and living away in that's the South. And that was a brand new environment that I had no idea about. And I think there slowly people would say things that were very subtle. Oh, I could tell you're native by your cheekbones. Oh, okay, I can tell by your hair. And just point out things that would identify me as a Native American. And then we could ask questions about what is it like to live on the reservation? Do you need a passport to be on the reservation? Do you guys still live in teepees? You know, you get asked all of these questions. And then from South Carolina, moved to Washington State for 4 years, and that's a whole different demographic. The Northwest is where I first met Carleen, and so we would go all over the place. And I think maybe that's where things started to get a little bit different for me, because that's when I started to notice that being Native American was kind of like being glorified. And it was very awkward because one time Carleen and I were out and some guy wanted to touch our hair after he found out we were Native. He's like, "Oh, you guys have great hair. Can I touch your hair?" And at that time, it didn't make sense. But looking back at it, just based on what my experience from what people know about Native Americans, that makes sense for people to say it doesn't make it right, but it makes sense to why people glorify meeting somebody. And it makes it even better when you're 100% Native. It adds that much. It's like a big halo that comes up over you. And it's like,
Almost like
deal. I'm just me.
yeah. I'm
Okay, Car, I missed that part. You said almost like,
objectifying us.
yeah.
Like, ooh, you're Native. Ooh, you know, I've experienced that at work, you know, just some ignorant people. I work HR, but there's a couple of times where I ran into people who just being ignorant, you know, like I was wearing and they were in style. I bought them like at Claire's or something, but they were earrings with these feathers, you know, and I wore it at our lunch, and there was about 12 of us, and this idiot says, "Oh, Carleen, you look very tribal today," you know, and he's like, "It's very beautiful, you know." I'm just like, and I regret not speaking up for myself and saying that's some dumb shit, you know. I wish I could go back and I didn't say anything because it was a work function. There was 12 other of my employees, and he was on my team, so I had, you know, I was in my way, I guess I was trying to be, I don't know, I brushed it off, and I shouldn't have. I did get quiet though. I think a lot of people did notice that I changed, you know, that the rest of the lunch just was really uncomfortable for me. But I'm on the same with Melanie. I grew up on the reservation, so majority of our schools, you know, was Native American. I went to, you know, all Navajos, you know, most majority Navajos. Then I went to Hopi High, so majority Hopi. So I really didn't experience racism that much in elementary school. Even in middle school, you know, like I went to Flagstaff, I went to Phoenix, and then there is where I just noticed the differences with racism. So all the you know, Mexicans hung together, and all the Native Americans hung together, you know, middle school. And so I noticed that, and as far as like the differences, but everybody got along majority of the time. So I didn't really experience it until I moved off the reservation and moved up here. And it's a whole nother kind of racism that people experience up here. I personally haven't experienced it up here too much, just more like Melanie was saying, just people being ignorant, saying ignorant things, like, you know, they kind of clump all the natives. So like, again, at lunch, so a couple of guys were like, "Oh yeah, Carleen's Native," and "Oh, you're Native? Oh, did you know that you can whale? Did you know that you can go fishing? You have fishing rights?" And I'm like, that's not. They're like, "Yeah, look it up. Go look it up." You know, I'm like, I don't need to look it up. I said, that's a whole nother treaty for, I'm Navajo. I'm not from up here. That's just for coastal natives. And they just didn't get it. No, look it up. Look it up. It was just ridiculous.
Cool.
So,
Go ahead, Starla.
so as far as elementary, I don't really remember a whole lot of being pointed out as, you know, being different. I was really talkative, made a lot of friends. so I don't really think of it that way. I don't remember any specifics, but working at KU, I worked there for probably about a year almost, and it's only diverse because of the international students. And what was crazy was that it was my manager. She is African American. She made it a point to, like, when we were alone, she'd be like, okay, you know, yeah, we're outside thinkers. She would make it a point to say, okay, well, we're minorities, we're different from everybody else. But then when we were around the upper management, upper administration, she acted white. And she would make like certain comments, you know, being ignorant, just being, I want to say stupid, like saying shit like, well, let's have a powwow, kind of dumb shit like that. And I'm just like, and I kind of look at her like crooked, you know, like, did you just really fucking say that, you know? And that just kind of like gave me a bad taste in my mouth about her. And I just like, you know, and it's two-faced. That's when, after that, I just kind of like, I really didn't like working with her after that. She made me want to leave, and I did. So it's just, you know, it's the whole culture, and it's the whole culture of, you know, KU working with that administration. But I loved working with the students. I really, really did. It was awesome. I hated to leave, but I couldn't do it.
So you mentioned that she basically was acting white once you guys were around upper leadership. And I think the term that people like to use for that is code switching, basically. And I'm wondering, do you guys ever feel like you have to code switch when you're at work or in professional spaces? Because I know for me, working in corporate America, I feel like I have to code switch in order to excel, basically, or I'm seen as a threat, or I'm seen as someone who's angry. And so I'm wondering, do you guys ever code switch? And I'm not saying in an ignorant way, because I don't switch to be ignorant and just say dumb jokes that white people say because they think it's funny when it's actually not, like the woman at KU was doing with you. But in general, I'm wondering, do you guys ever feel the need to kind of change how you talk, things that you say at work in order to not be perceived a certain way, or for me, in my case, to not be perceived as a threat?
I not really. I guess like I call it more my customer service voice. Like I'm more my tone is really low anyway, but I do have to turn on my customer service voice. I mean, so I'm not, you know, making sure I don't I guess I don't know, come off as aggressive, but no, I don't really have that experience. Do any of you guys?
I think for me, it's the negative thoughts or the negative stereotypes that come to mind when I'm doing something, and I kind of put up this protection. Like, if I do this, are they going to think this? Like, if I buy a 6-pack, are they going to think I'm a native alcoholic, or am I part of that stigma of being the alcoholic native and with that bad reputation? So it kind of makes you hesitant a little bit. Or if you're kind of grubbing down on some good food, and you're in the back of my mind is are people going to think like this is why natives are diabetic all the time, or have that increase in health issues because of how I'm eating? So it's back of my mind. I do have that little voice that says, what does this look like if I do this? I try not to let it bother me, but that does come to mind.
So growing up traditionally, I've also incorporated that into just everyday life from what I remember and from what my mom reminds me of every day. And it always goes back to that. So it's always that back thought in, and that thought in the back of your mind, which is be mindful. You don't want to be perceived as, you know, um, too greedy, but you want to be mindful. So in the back of my mind, when I'm always in that, when I'm, at work and that 8 to 5, it's always there. So when I am at work, I may be different, but I'm always going to be me. But I am mindful about what I say to certain people, but I'm always going to be me. And it's just growing up that way. We were taught to be that way. Whenever you go to a relative's house, don't eat too much. Don't make yourself too much at home. Don't overstay your welcome. You're always taught these things as a kid growing up. So that's why, when you're at work or when you have your own space and place, you always have that. So that's where that comes in. And even at work, that always comes in. So that's how I think of it.
So outside of work, how does race show up in you guys' life? Like if you are out at the store shopping, or I don't know, going on a walk. I shared this last week with the other group that my husband and I live, and so we live in the rich white area, and just happened a couple days ago, like where we were going to our car and it's parked on the street. So we don't have like garage parking, we have street parking here. And he was parked right next to a stairway that comes down from another apartment complex or building. And this Asian family is coming down the steps and they see us and they stop. Instead of going down the stairs and walking down the stairway to the sidewalk, they walk behind bushes so they don't have to come by us. Like this happens all the time. Like we've gone on a walk here. There's a trail, the I-90 trail. We go on a walk. And this older white woman has literally walked in the street around a tree so she wouldn't have to walk on the sidewalk with us. And this is like a regular thing. People will see us outside, wait and watch us to see if we actually live in the buildings, see if we live here, or you'll get people who actually speak. So most of them, they won't speak. They'll look down at the ground, don't want to make eye contact, even if we say, hi, how are you? But the ones that do speak, it's more of like asking questions to kind of find out, do we actually live here? How long have we lived here? Where do you work? What kind of job do you have? Like, do you actually have enough money to live in this area kind of questions? And so I'm just curious how race shows up for you guys just in your everyday regular life.
Experienced anything like that. I think I've been fortunate to live in very diverse areas. I think the hardest was living in the South, but I don't have a lot of memories about that time. It's so long ago. And then just my appearance, I blend in. I'm either mistaken for Asian, or if I'm hanging around a lot of the Latino crowd, I can be Mexican, Latino, Filipino from the Northwest. So it's a big blend. And here, I live in the Bay Area, and so the population is very diverse, very diverse. So I would think, especially in my workplace, I work in a clinic, and so the population, the Caucasian demographic is very low. And even in my neighborhood, when we first moved to this neighborhood 3 years ago, we went trick-or-treating, and I kind of noted that every house we went to was of a different ethnicity. And we probably ran into maybe not even a handful of Caucasians in my neighborhood, which was great. I love it. And so my my neighbor to the left of me is Asian, and my neighbor to the right of me, they are Mexicans, and then the neighbor to the left, I believe that they are of Middle Eastern descent, and it's very diverse. So the only thing that happens to me is nobody can really identify what I am at the time. And then so when I point it out, that's when they start, oh, okay, I see it now. And it's like, okay. So I'm blendable, I guess you could say.
I would agree with Melanie. When I first, because I, living in Washington, when I first came up here, everyone's like, "Oh, you're Pinay," thinking I'm Filipino or Mexican. They don't. Native American is never their first guess. But like I said, once I tell them I'm Native American, then they're like really intrigued, and mostly respectful. But just thinking about I don't really experience racism like in my work area, but it's funny because I look out for it. So like, for example, we have a Halloween activity or event at my work, so I'm looking out to see if anyone's dressed up in any Native regalia, that kind of thing, because I would be so disappointed. I haven't seen that, but I look out for it. Or like with Starla, she mentioned somebody saying, yeah, let's have a powwow. Like, I would just lose total respect for anybody and just would really be disappointed if I heard somebody say that. I don't know if I would address it though. I always wondered that, like, oh, what would I say if like somebody I looked up to at at my work said something like that. But yeah, I look out for it. I would have to say Charles, they probably experienced it more than I have. Just because he lives up here in the Northwest, they have fishing rights and clamming. They can clam in traditional areas, and a lot of their traditional areas where they have rights to clam and fish are off of the reservation, and they're on private property, or so he's experienced more racism than I have, trying to clam on a beach, and then the homeowner comes out and saying derogatory things to them. Even just recently, he is a high school coach for a varsity girls basketball team, and he experienced racism going through that process. Like so he was hired, but it had to be paused because people didn't like the fact that he was a Native American and going to be in this position. Like, I think even the athletic director who was pushing for Charles to get this position was called an Indian lover. So he really went through it just with his position at the high school here. So that was disappointing. That I felt bad that he had to go through that.
So I've always lived in diverse neighborhoods as well. So going for walks, never, not saying never have I ever, but haven't come across it. I try not to, leave my resting bitch face on when going walking. I love smiling. But you kind of get like when shopping, you get in certain stores and you just feel that energy. When we first got to Kansas, when we first got to Lawrence, I had no idea what I was in for, and I was kind of new to traveling states, moving, and I was on my own, just me and my son. He was only 4 at the time. And like our first couple weeks there, we went to Walmart. I'm like, okay, Walmart, not a big thing. I walk in and like you just kind of get this eerie feeling. And I'm like, this is weird. I walk in and you just get all like that feeling like everybody's staring at you. And I was like, what is this feeling? And everybody's just watching me. And I'm like, what is this? And I'm like, I kind of look up and I'm like, I'm in Walmart, right? Having to double check. It was crazy. And I was like, what? Wow, and, obviously I got used to it after a few months, but it was interesting. It was definitely a crazy experience. looking back at it, I love Lawrence. You know, it was a great place to raise my kid. It just that first few weeks, and you know, even sitting down at restaurants and eating, it was the same kind of thing, you know, and it was just the two of us, and it was crazy. That was same thing with Target, you know, and but you know, thankfully they didn't follow us around or anything. I know probably like a year after my niece came to Haskell as well, she ended up staying on campus, and one of her trips to Hobby Lobby, they actually were following her around in the store, like through her whole shopping, you know, trip, and even like all the way to when she got to the register, she said, and she just ended up like dumping all her stuff and just walking out. So I wasn't with her at the time, you know, so I never came across that, but I had heard, you know, from other Haskell students.
Yeah.
The vast majority of students came across that too. So it's just crazy.
Yeah,
Starla, in that area, are there a lot of Native students? You said it.
There is.
Okay.
So Haskell Indian Nations University has over 150. As long as you're from a federally recognized tribe, then you can attend Haskell. It's a free university.
Okay. Carleen, were you about to say something?
It reminded me of actually an incident that me and Charles experienced when I had first met him. I was 21 years old. Him and I went driving around. We had just met and we went up. He was showing me around. So there's like reservations all over this area in the Puget Sound. And he was just showing me all these different, you know, really cool, beautiful locations. And we stopped in, we were up in Squim, and we stopped in at this restaurant. And he warned me. He was always telling me about, you know, racism that he's experienced living up here. And so we go into this restaurant, and ignored. We sat there for I don't know how long, but nobody came to get our, you know, our order. It was something I had never, like, just so blatant, never experienced. White families were coming in, getting seated, even getting their food served already. It got to the point where it just made me so mad. Him and I both just got up and left, and we never stepped foot back into that restaurant. But they also reminded me of my father's story. So I reached out to my dad just to ask him, you know, what he's experienced in Phoenix, and he said the same thing. And I do remember several times, but you know, it becomes so normal. You know, I just kind of brush it off. But there are times where sometimes we're in a restaurant, whether in Flagstaff or in Phoenix, and you come in a group of natives, you know, and you get seated, and other people, you know, the service is different. You know, you look around and the white families are getting, you know, having their drinks refilled, or their food comes out before us. So I have experienced that, and it's just hit and miss. It's not every time, but that does happen too.
So and to add to that too, so in Flagstaff, I was with my late grandmother, my uncle, my cousin, and my son at the time. I think he was probably maybe about one. And same thing happened. The hostess had sat a couple of people before us. And you know, my late grandmother, she was old, and I was like, okay, I'm standing there and I'm like, interesting. So I finally went up and I asked him, I said, okay, I said, but we were here first. So he kind of just brushed it off, didn't really respond. I gave him a chance. And he finally sat us, but we were like far away from everybody else. We were like tucked in the back in the corner. And I was like, okay. And I was buying, you know, dinner for everybody. So I definitely had a say. And so, my grandmother, she loved ribs. My uncle, he was a meat eater too. I had two big boys that I was feeding, so my ticket wasn't cheap. And when all our food came out, some of it was cold, and I was like, oh no. So I ended up calling the manager, and they fixed it. Ended up like half pricing the ticket and, comping half of our meal. But after that, I was like blacklisting, the Chili's after that. I was like, never again. And even Flagstaff is like that. I was like, this is interesting, so close to home, but you would have never expected, for Winslow, yeah. With the teacher, but I would have never thought in Flag that I would have experienced something like that, but I don't spend too much time in Flag anymore.
Right. And it's crazy because when you think about like how they make comments of, oh, well, so-and-so people don't tip well, or so-and-so people, I don't like to serve them because they're not going to tip, they're cheap, they're this, they're that. But then they give you the most ridiculous service and then still expect you to tip them like they did something great. And so it's like, I feel like it's hard for people of color because then it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy for the server anyways, because you're giving somebody horrible service, but with the thought that it's because they don't give a good tip in the first place, so I'm just going to do the bare minimum. And then you're pissed when they give you the bare minimum, but it's like, bitch, if you would have just did your job, like these people would tip you correctly. Like, what are you talking about? It's crazy. Cold food, having to send it back, sitting for who knows how long until someone even acknowledges you. But then they have the idea that, well, I don't want to serve them because they don't tip. And it's like, no, they're not tipping you because you're doing a horrible job. Like, that would go for anybody. If you're not doing your job, you're not going to get tipped. So, yeah, it's just, it's insane. When you guys were talking, it made me think about a time when I was like in elementary school and we were driving home and I told my dad, oh, I want Burger King. I want something from Burger King. So he's like, okay, whatever, I'll stop. He says, run in, here's the money, run in and get whatever you want to get. And then I'm in there for a while because I'm standing in line and white people are just walking past me, walking in front of me. The people at the counter like, oh, hey, how can I help you? Like, not looking at me. So clearly not me, helping other people who've come in behind me. And so after a while, my dad finally comes into the Burger King and he's like, Tara, what's taking so long? And I was like, well, I haven't ordered yet. And he was like, but you've been in here for like 10, 15 minutes. What do you mean you haven't ordered yet? It's like, well, all these people just keep going around me. And so then immediately my dad's like, where the fuck is the manager at in this place? Then the guy comes from the back and he's like, sir, what's the matter? How can I help you? And then he was like, why have you motherfuckers been serving all these other people when you see my daughter standing right here? I know you've seen her. And then they're like, oh, we didn't see her. We didn't see her. What is it that you want to order? And so we finally order. They bring the food out, and then the guy is like tossing my food in the bag instead of putting it in there like a normal person. And he goes to throw my burger inside the bag, and my dad caught that shit and threw it at the dude's head. Fucking knocked his glasses off. His visor was sideways. It was hilarious, but at the same time, it was like. But he reacted that way probably because this has happened to him so many times in his life by this point, and now somebody is doing it to his kid. And so it's just like, yeah, I remember this too from when I was a kid, and my dad went crazy. And at the time, I didn't know why he went crazy. I'm like, yeah, I get it. You're mad because they're not serving me, but like, it's not that big of a deal. Whatever. We can just wait. And then now that I'm older and it's happened a bunch of times, like, I get it. Like, I don't have kids yet, but when I do, if someone is treating me a certain way or treating my kids a certain way, and I know where it's coming from, I feel like I might throw some shit at somebody's head too. Like, I don't know. Like, yeah.
And it's the reaction, the frustration that's been bottled up, and the reaction that people pay more attention to, not the other circumstances or instances that it happened, but how we reacted. And I think living in Arizona for like maybe 10 years, we had a sheriff, Sheriff Joel Payo, that was very out to get Hispanics, Latinos. And so at that time, he said that it was okay to racially profile to stop somebody because he was stopping and checking for citizenship. And so because we are blendable, and I am blendable, my husband's brown, we actually got our Navajo identification census number as an ID card so that we can carry it as proof that we are citizens. We have that, our driver's license, our social security, right? We have to show that we are citizens, so that because we could potentially have been racially profiled at any time by the police department. So that was something we kind of had to work around, even though it didn't really particularly target us. It was because of our skin color that we would be stopped. And are we going to be believed if we didn't have the appropriate documentation?
Right. That's crazy.
And I think with that restaurant incident, it was just that it had happened so much. And it was me defending my late grandmother because of the fact that when I was a child, I had seen it so much. I seen it happen to her so much because I would drive her around. I would have to interpret for her when like the first of the month came around, and I had to help her pay her bills, and just these assholes taking advantage of her, you know, and having to like lowball her and just treating her like shit. And I think that's kind of what ticked me off the most. And I was like, oh no, 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 you know, I'm done. You know, even when we did move back home, back to Winslow, I was there. I would help her as much as I could at that time too. And I was like, this has got to stop, you know? And I'm just like, you don't deserve this. There's this restaurant that she would always go to as well. It's Earl's in Gallup. And I mean, there may have been like a couple of times where they had gotten poor service, but I'm like, my grandparents had been coming here for probably the last 30 years, you know? And I'm like, granted, it's like maybe once, twice a month, but they're freaking loyal customers, you know? And I'm just, I was outraged, and I finally, like, I had it. And I do state it differently now. And that's the difference, because in Lawrence, you know, they look at you and they don't think that you're educated enough to say or articulate any sort of any words, any response to their vulgar responses to, well, you shouldn't be here, that kind of shit. And it's like, you know what, you shouldn't be here, you know, this is what I know, and this is what you don't know, you know. And it's just that. And then they like, oh shit, you know, and then they stop. And it's like, okay, exactly, you know. And I've done that a couple of times in front of my child, and I'm like, and I apologized to him, and I said, Mommy didn't mean to say those bad words, but it had to be said.
Right. And the whole you shouldn't be here thing is also just insane to me.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys have seen this video that's been going around recently, but there are these two Native people in like a gas station or something, and white woman is in there telling them, I'm sorry, we're not serving you. You need to leave. You need to leave. And it's like, bitch, you don't even own this grocery store or
Yeah.
gas station, first of all. So how are you saying we're not serving you and you need to leave? And then she proceeds to ask the Native woman, yeah, well, where were you born? Were you even born here? Because I think that she was assuming she was Mexican is what was going on here. So it was like, where were you born? And then the girl goes, where were you born? Not here. My ancestors are from here, not yours, bitch. And then the white woman goes over, proceeds to push her, and then the girl slapped the shit out of the lady. And then like, oh my God, then she tries to hurry up and leave the store. Like the other girl did something crazy, but it's like you tried to provoke her, then you pushed her. And before all of that, you were insulting her.
Yeah, the Native community on Facebook have memes already for that. I think there's t-shirts now.
I was so glad that she said something to her though. And then if someone had something to say about her slapping her, it's like, but the lady put her hands on her first. Whether she slapped her or she pushed her because she was trying to provoke her. So I was like, thank God. I was dying when I seen that. So all of you guys I know have children. And so I want to know, do you guys have race conversations with your kids? And if you do, or if you don't, like, why? And what do those conversations sound like? I know my parents have always told us, especially my mom, like, be aware and look out. Always be vigilant of your surroundings because people will treat you bad even when you haven't done anything bad. And so I'm wondering if you guys have had to have these kind of conversations with your kids, or do you guys even remember your own parents having these type of conversations with you?
My parents never, or my grandparents, they've never really had those kind of conversations. It was more like they'd share stories of what happened to them. They never really, I don't remember a conversation ever like, this is what you do, you know, but you kind of just learn. I don't know. It just kind of, I don't remember having that specific conversation, but just hearing their stories, you know, like, you know, my grandpa, somebody over at Santa Fe went and signed some papers because he was Native, or, you know, just those kind of things. I remember, it's not really has to do with racism, but my grandma, I remember when she told me the first time she had dinner with a white man, because she just remembers those kind of things, you know, because that's not something she'd ever had done before. So just to her, it was just kind of, it was different. I don't know why, but it was just funny hearing her story. We have talked about that with our kids, but, you know, just the other day when I knew I was going to be part of this panel, I just kind of reached out to all three and asked them, have you ever experienced anything, you know, any racism? And they're like, no. I think Lisa, back when in elementary school, I think she was probably in 4th grade. I think somebody called her dirty Mexican, but she laughed because it's like, nice try, that's not what I am, you know, like this person couldn't even, she was laughing at the fact that this girl didn't even know who she was talking to. She just kind of threw it out there. So we just told her that, you know, that's a reflection of her parents. Her parents are teaching her something at their house, or yeah, you know. So but she didn't take offense to it, just because, you know, it's like, well, that's not what I am, nice try, you know. But I wanted to take it back to, I was going to share a story that Starla was talking about, and you with your dad. You know, I love hearing stories where the parents just react, because I'm almost not okay, but like like, you know, you can be ignorant and say stuff to me, but if it were to happen to my kid, you know, or any, you know, with our kids, I could see the reaction is going to be a lot more different, like aggressive, like with your dad throwing the burger. You know, Charles shared with me a story when he was a kid. He said he remembers his Auntie Peggy took him to the beach. There's this beach that here called Old Man House. And all of the waterfront real estate here used to belong to the tribe. So now they're all, you know, private property. And if you go down to the beach, there used to be signs that said, you know, you can't walk beyond this point, private property. And he just ventured off onto the beach. One of the homeowners came down, was a lady, and was shouting derogatory things to him, telling him to get off, you know, her beach. And his Aunt Peggy went over there and just bitched this lady out. He said it was the best thing ever. He loved it. She was just giving, you know, this lady basically a history lesson. Like, you know, I love that story.
Which she should.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of these people need history lessons. It's insane. It's great.
As far as racism and, you know, relating that to my child, growing up, it wasn't explained to us. It was told from their experiences. So I guess that's in a way their teachings, um, told to us by their experiences. So obviously times have changed. With my son, the way that I do it is through experiences. Again, kind of just trying to keep that tradition going. And I also, through movies, you know, um, because he's definitely growing up different than I did. Um, because the public school here was definitely different from Lawrence. But there was always, you could always tell which teachers really cared. The educators, especially the principals, you know, they really understood, and especially if he ever had any experiences with bullying, but they wouldn't tolerate, you know, racism, anything like that. That wasn't tolerated at all. So I'm thankful for that. So that's why it kind of helps through my stories, through our trips to the store, our trips to restaurants, and also movies. The other night we actually just watched one where the kid got shot and she was in the car. I forget that movie.
Is it called the
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Sorry, I apologize. So we watched that, you know, kind of, because with everything going on, I didn't let him watch anything about Floyd. But I did tell him about it. So just watching that, then kind of talking about it after, and then just, you know, getting his insight about things like that, and if he's ever experienced things at school with his friends, usually he's the one to stand up, if he hears anything and he knows, you know, to say something, whether it's to his teacher or, you know, to the counselors or anything like that too. So it's kind of neat, to get his insights and to kind of see how his little mind works. It's nice to know that his mind is, you know, is adapting into kind of understanding better than, you know, most kids would. That's how I teach him, and we're kind of going through this together.
Yeah, these are smart these days. I mean, I wish Patty would have been able to join us, but she had a really good story just recently. Because Patty is Mexican and part Apache, just a little bit of Apache, but her son had his best friend sleep over, but his best friend's family are like, you know, MAGA, you know, supporters, and a fight broke out in the middle of the night, and like his best friend said something about the wall being built, and you know they started going back about George Floyd. So like just the fact that these little kids, I think her son is probably in 6th grade, but I mean they're having these conversations and it led to a fight. But I really wish she was here to share that, and just the things that her son, you know, the points that he was bringing up. It's like, oh wow, he really knows what he's talking about, and he really understands the full scope of everything, you know. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Yeah, these kids are smart.
They are.
And like Starla was saying, and I think that attributes to all the social media, you know, things like the videos and, you know, these memes and movies and
Right. Access to everything in a phone at any second.
yeah.
I know for me, like I said, I was teenage parent and immediately moved off the reservation. And so my oldest is 22 now. And so she has,
You don't
so
look like you could be old enough to have a 22-year-old.
yes, it's a lot of makeup. So we lived off the reservation for a lot of years, her early years off the reservation, but we would visit often. And I didn't really feel like we needed to talk about race. I just felt like we knew who we were at that time. We're born this way. We just know. But it wasn't until, you know, we would watch a lot of Disney movies. One of her favorites was Pocahontas. And when she was around about 5 or 6 years old, we went back to the reservation to visit family. And we stopped at a store along the freeway, Arizona, New Mexico border area. And they always have the porcelain Native American dolls and feathers, and it's very cliche items in the store. So we walked in and it was full of like dream catchers and feathers. And she was like, my daughter was 4, 5, or 6 at the time. And she's like, look at all of these savages in this store. And that was the moment that I realized I need to talk to her about who she is. So we talked about being Native American, and that's when I realized that what we watch is very powerful for the children. What they are exposed to is what people see, and that's what is believed to be true. So after that, we kind of had a talk and tried to let her understand who she was, and how savages was what we were labeled by other people because of who we were, and try to teach her that difference. We moved to the Bay Area 3 years ago, and my second daughter, she was about 12 in 8th grade, and some girls approached her because she was new to school, and they asked her like, oh, where are you from? And she said, I'm from Arizona. And they're like, oh, are you Mexican? And she's like, no, I'm Native American. And they're like, oh, I see. That makes sense. You're hecka white. You're too hecka white to be Mexican. And so my daughter was like kind of put off by that. Like, what does that mean? So these are new conversations for them. My son hasn't really shared any experiences of racism that he's had, but we did recently watch on Netflix. Have you guys seen When They See Us, the series?
I could not watch it because I know the history behind it.
Mm-hmm.
And those type of things, I just cannot watch them. They literally make me sick.
It was very intense, especially the first episode. But if you go through it, you go through the emotions with everybody. And then you can follow up with the Oprah interview that they have on Netflix as well. So that brings it back to, but that's real, right? And I watched that with my son, and it was a safe place to watch it because I was able to have a discussion with him about it. And he was angry. He felt that transference. He was angry for what had happened. And I was telling him, yes, there are people that do that because of people's skin color. You might experience things like that because of your skin color, or just saying your nationality to people. So what do we do about that? How do we react to it? How do we express our thoughts and share what we're feeling in a safe manner? But that was helpful for a conversation that I had with my son. And I think we've all just experienced small comments, racial slurs, things like that, for other nationalities, because nobody ever really knows what we are, so they just jump to stereotypes and identify us automatically, and then express those things towards us. But it's never correct until they know that we are Native American. Then they add their 2 cents at that point.
Yeah. Just taking it back to what you were saying about, Fiona's your daughter's watching this, movies and all those savages. And I was Charles has a really good friend that has been on a few, he's been on a motion picture. So we tune in a few times. We've tuned in to watch him, to see what, just to see him, on TV. And that's exactly how they paint him. Like this, we were expecting to have all these lines, but no, he was shooting bows and arrows and being that stoic, silent native, which was kind of disappointing because, this guy's a smart guy, That was just one movie that we'd seen him like that, but I know like a lot in the past, a lot of Native, when they're, you know, put in these movies, it's like the same character. But recently, actually, I think it was Yellowstone we started watching, and then there they portray natives, like, you know, I think there's like some tribal chairmen in there, and, you know, the suit and the tie businessmen, you know, so it's getting better. But I mean,
Slowly,
it just
yeah.
Finally.
it just
And
reminds
there's this documentary on Netflix. It's called Real Engine. Have you guys seen that? That's so good. It talks about the history of stereotypes, because stereotypes came from Hollywood, right? How they portray people. And there's different eras in which the Native American is portrayed. We're the enemy, the savage, we're ruthless, or we're the jokesters, they're the clowns, and it transitions, and then it talks about how Native women are stereotyped and what Hollywood created, and it's really good. So if you guys get a chance, maybe today, Ford Real Engine, it's really good.
Yeah, I'll look into that. Another thing on the savage topic that right when you said that, that just was like, ugh, oh my God. Because like we were saying earlier, people need to learn their history. And if you want to know who the real savage is, it's not Native people, it's white folks. White people have been out here massacring, slaughtering, raping, doing all types of things that a savage would do. But somehow it just seems like every other group of people always get these very negative labels attached to them and their identity, and everyone believes them. Even some people within your own community, like even in the Black community, some people actually believe the things that have been placed as labels on us and live that way, because they don't actually believe in themselves or what they can be because of how we are portrayed in everything. And so, yeah, when you said that your daughter said that, I'm like, damn, that's crazy, because she's little and she's seeing this, and then she's thinking these people are savages, but not knowing that those people that she's talking about, that she learned from a movie or TV, is her own self. And so I'm glad that you were able to like sit her down. So now she knows, no, like, I'm not a savage. So clearly no one else who's a Native is a savage. Like,
Yeah.
And it's funny because with everything that I learned or relearned at Haskell, the true history, because obviously it's something that was never taught in public schools about what really happened, and how they glorify, you know, Thanksgiving and Christopher Columbus and all his bullshit. With Gabriel, my son, he sits in class, you know, around this time usually, and he'll listen at first. And so I'll ask him, you know, when he comes home that day, and I'll say, so what'd you guys talk about today? And he goes, oh yeah, Mom. He goes, so my teacher tried to, you know, talk about Columbus and how good he was and all this and that. And he goes, and I said, oh yeah. I said, was that it? And he goes, no. I said, so what'd you say? And my little smart ass kid, he was like, I told her the truth.
I'm glad. Please. Today, please.
Oh, I was like, oh my God, my child.
Awesome though, because him speaking up, that's a reflection of you. Like he knows who he is, and he's not going to let somebody else tell him who he is.
Absolutely.
Good job, Mama.
So we've talked about a lot leading up to this point, and so I want to get you guys' perspective on how you think the Native experience, the things you guys have experienced, the things your parents have told you guys about, has now manifested mentally and physically, like within you guys' community. Because I know within the Black community, it's come with a lot of low self-esteem or no self-esteem at all. It's come with certain diseases like heart disease, diabetes, just very unhealthy ways of living. very, very bad mental health, drug abuse, substance abuse, um, alcoholism. I know that is a thing that is within my own family that I've witnessed. So I'm curious what you guys think, or how you guys think these things have affected your own community mentally and physically.
The same way as, with especially with mental health, like that's a big issue on the reservation with the youth and even adults. But yeah, the same alcoholism. Yep, I agree. It manifested itself in that way too. It affects our community.
Definitely. Substance abuse, alcohol abuse, mental illness, obesity, diabetes, and it's when trying to explain it to my mom, because you know she was a teenage mom. She had my oldest brother at when she was in 8th grade, so she didn't end up finishing school, and so it's definitely a hardship for her. But being a parent was her main priority. Being a caretaker for both my grandparents was one of them as well. Um, and now she's taking on, our homestead. It's a lot, and I commend her for that. Um, so the lack of education, it's not from lack of trying. It's just the lack of knowledge, and that's where I definitely want to try to come in, because it's you know from that I feel it's hatred kind of fueled in that, but it's also just her watching news and listening to opinions. It's not really facts, and it's and learning from grad school and researching and doing everything that I've done thus far. It's more or less, they're just trying to egg you on, trying to make you feel all this, anger and rage, and saying, oh yeah, it's the Hispanics that are causing the issues. It's really not. And if you really come to think about it, all of us are indigenous to this land. We weren't the only ones here first. The Hispanics were, coming up from the South as well. Just trying to reiterate that and kind of re-educate her as to don't hate other minority groups. It's, we're all in this together, and it's just we're all facing, that alcoholism, we're struggling with the same thing: substance abuse, mental illness, it's all of these, homelessness. It's every single group that's out on the streets, and it's not favoring one minority group over another. It's everybody. But I know up north, on our reservation, they made this water bottle, and it's infused with all these chemicals that you can buy over the counter. And on top of that, meth is huge. The local authorities really don't care about it, and it's not to say that they probably have, due to limited resources, they probably cannot investigate, or but it is tribal land, so it's actually federal jurisdiction. So it's insane, but it's there. It's a problem, but what can we do except educate our own families? But you know what, I can honestly say that I'm 9 years sober, 9 years plus sober. I haven't had a drink of alcohol. I haven't done any drugs. I haven't, so I'm thankful. and I hope to help my family. It's a small step, but it's the start of something.
And I love this topic. This is like my niche. I love historical trauma. I have my master's in social work, so that's something that I'm hoping to expound upon it and really be able to form some type of educational piece to share about it. And it's very true that trauma is carried from generation to generation, and it starts back from ancestors and ancestors and how they had their way of life. They could be living casual, just dealing with the natural dangers of the environment, weather, predators, even invaders at that time, right? Tribes were still battling things out. And that has certain aspects and traits that were passed on to the children that were born in that era. And then you go into the generations when the colonizers and settlers were coming into town and spreading Christianity. That's a whole nother era of trauma that these outsiders are coming in, and really that's where the whitewashing is starting to become, or no, that's where we're savages, right? Where where they're trying to settle and we're in the way. And the parents that were fighting at the time bore children, and so there's those survival mechanisms that have formed, those ways of coping, whether coping with that new scenario that was happening. And then you go to, let's fast forward to a boarding school era where people were taken from families, whitewashed, forced on religion, all shoved in a building for education, English, things like that. No parent role models, no.
Did they also shave the Native people's hair?
Cut.
Yes, they cut them.
Yeah, they did like a kind of like a
bowl,
straight. Yeah.
And
yeah.
what was the reasoning behind that? Because I know in Africa they shave their hair and then move them around, basically. So now you're forced to speak English because you guys can't speak to each other. So now you're to speak our language.
Yes. It is a loss of identity. Native Americans have a lot of stories behind the length of everybody's hair, and that goes along tribes across the U.S. is long hair has their stories, and so by cutting that, you're cutting that linkage to their culture. And that goes to speaking the languages too. If you're speaking your native tongue, you're going to be beaten because you need to speak English. English is the language. And so all of these children that were put into these boarding schools, abused, sexually assaulted, physically assaulted, no parent role models. They've grown up into the system and then released back to the reservation, and they're expected to have an identity and be able to raise children when they have a family. And so that's when they have to deal with the trauma that was brought onto them. They have to process all of that with no mental health services. You go to coping skills. Alcohol, it was the big thing, right? And then now these parents that have used alcohol as a coping skill, violence, because children learn from, so if we're being abused, we usually tend to abuse. That's the cycle, abusing children. So now this upcoming generation is having their own problems and own things to work through. And then it goes to marijuana, the opioid addiction, meth, and what now, right? What are we all struggling with right now? I know that the reservations are having a big opiate epidemic, and methamphetamines and alcohol is still an ongoing issue. So where does it end? We have to be able to talk about the trauma that has happened from generation to generation, families to families. And for me, seeing that linkage, it really opened my eyes because of how my family was growing up. My father was alcoholic. He was very abusive. And then his grandparents were alcoholic. His parents were alcoholic and abusive. And it really made sense because we didn't have that that proper guidance, that proper harmony of everything in the balance was removed. And so we had to learn with what we had. And as humans, we adjust just for survival, and those were survival mechanisms. So if we're able to share that knowledge with others, I hope that other people will be able to say, yeah, the way I don't, I don't really have ill will towards my dad for how we were treated as children or what he's gone through, but I understand where it came from, and I can make that difference and change it, and then share with my children that this is where the change is going to happen, where it stops, where alcohol use maybe stops, abuse, the substance abuse stops. And like Starla, I haven't had alcohol in 10 years. And so that's been a whole mind difference as well. So that made a really big difference.
I don't know. All this stuff is just, it's crazy to think about, but then when you actually talk about it, then I feel like it hits a lot harder. And like you were breaking down just the trauma over generations and how people cope. It's just, how do you expect certain people to come out of that when they don't have access to things like a counselor or something of that sort? And I know in the Black community, mental health or going to go see a counselor is considered something that is taboo, or it's a bad thing, or something is wrong with you if you decide that you want to go see a counselor. Is it the same thing in Native culture, or is it something that is advocated for?
Yeah, currently it is considered still a taboo. We don't talk about it because if we talk about that negative energy, we're attracting it. That is my perception of it. And it's not talked about. You don't talk about it. You don't share it. You don't, even with grief. I think that was one big thing that kind of hit me, is when somebody passed, we don't talk about them. We have to let them continue on their journey. And if we talk about them, we're holding them back. But we don't have that time to have that normal grieving process. It's just keep going, be positive. And that's a great aspect to, and great traits to have, but we still also need to have that middle ground. We are processing it. And I would definitely want, my goal in the future is hopefully to kind of break down that stereotype that it is a taboo. But how can we focus on mental health but still respect that taboo? How can we have a discussion about it to where it's not crossing the lines for some people who really are fearful of that taboo? I want to make it respectable culturally, and it's going to be, I don't know, a slow process, a slow barrier to kind of break down so that it is acceptable.
And as far as counselors go, this is where, like, shaman, they would come in. They're pretty much your counselors, your preachers, your everything. If you're wanting to grieve, or if you want to repent, that's how it would have taken place back then. So it's definitely different now. Times have changed, but it is, for those that do still practice traditional medicine, it is still the same, and I do still do it whenever I need to, and I also incorporate the today's medicine as well. I go to counselor. I have a therapist. I had to, and it was something that I had to do for myself, because it's an experience that I went through that nobody in my family ever went through. We lost my late ex-husband. It was unexpected. It was to suicide. So I didn't know how to cope. I didn't know how to deal. that instance, it was, you know, and thankfully my late grandmother was still here. I tried that going on, you know, with my day-to-day. But raising a 3-year-old at the same time, that was difficult, especially, you know, just after our divorce. So there was just a lot. And I have great support system, family. They have, you know, different backgrounds. One of my aunts, she works in behavioral health, you know, so she's definitely got a ton of resources, and, you know, and I'm always open. You know, I don't knock anybody for anything that they feel that would help, you know, and I definitely went for it, and, you know, it led me to these two back here. So I'm grateful. I'm very grateful, because I would not have made it this far.
Yeah, there's a lot of aspects of the Navajo culture that promotes wellness, and it really aligns with therapy. And so to bring Western medicine and that Navajo culture together, I think that would be a really good balance. I think of my father, who I'm going to diagnose him with depression because of a lot of things that he's seen as a child. And he did experience some anxiety recently, that like panic attacks. And I was trying to explain to him what panic attacks are. But, you know, he's very traditional. So he's like, okay, I understand what you're saying, but I'm going to go see my medicine man and have him tell me what's wrong with me, you know? And so they have their own outcome to what happened, and I told him, I think with this scenario, you're out chopping wood and you got some wood from a tree that was struck by lightning, right? And we're not supposed to touch that. And so he got his prayer done and he felt better, you know. But with Western medicine, it was an anxiety attack because of the things that he was experiencing at that time. He had just lost his mom, and he had newfound family members coming into, he finally knew who his biological father was after 55 years of life. And so I could see and diagnose him, and then he can also get that self-soothing from his spirituality.
I'm also a huge advocate for counseling. I've done counseling myself. Me and my husband have gone to premarital counseling before we got married. And so I think it's a great thing, but I also studied it in school. So I think that I'm open-minded to therapy and counseling and things of that sort. My dad, he is not at all. I know the first thing that my dad said is when we're like, oh yeah, we're going to do premarital counseling. He was like, well, if they ask something about your parents, let them know I'm not coming to that shit. And I'm like, first of all, you're not invited. That's fine, but you're not invited. But like just that type of response is something that doesn't even have to do with him going to counseling, tells me that we still have a long way to go.
Yeah.
As far as accepting Western medicine or help from people who usually are not people of color, I think that's something that also comes into play when you're looking for a counselor. I know when we were looking for one for our premarital counseling, it took forever to find a person of color. Like lots of searching, to the point where we couldn't even use our insurance because someone within our insurance was not anybody of a person of color. And so we just paid out of pocket. So I know I'm kind of speaking from a privileged place to say, okay, well, we can pay out of pocket for counseling, and not everyone can do that. But I'm hopeful that we're moving in the right direction as far as mental health is concerned. I also want to point out that people think mental health is only for bad situations, but you can go see a counselor anytime, just to keep yourself in a space that is progressive moving forward, sharing ideas with someone. But yeah, I'm a huge advocate for counseling.
Yeah, same. I'm a therapist, and I see a therapist. So
That's good.
It's very helpful.
Well, ladies, we've gone through all of the topics I wanted to discuss with you guys, but my closing question for you is, what do you have to say to the people who make comments of race being non-existent, or when you share your experience, they question it and say, well, do you really think that was a race thing? Like, what do you guys have to say to those people?
I don't know what rock they're living under if they don't think racism is alive and well. Yeah, I don't. That's just plain ignorance to me. I really don't address the topic with people who pretend it doesn't exist, and it's usually people that are not of, that aren't African American or Mexican or Native American. It's usually white people who I've heard that from, or I've seen comments mostly like on Facebook. Yeah, it's not an imaginary thing. It's real.
Starla, Melanie?
I think the comment that I despise most is get over it. You know, with the vines and the topics of colonizers taking over our land and them telling us we'll just get over it. And I go back to that, and that again just goes back to racism, obviously. And I do say that, I agree with Carleen 100%. It is alive and well. I include in that with just telling them, you don't see it from my perspective at all. And I wish you could. It's like, I wish I had a pair of glasses to give to you to see it from where I'm sitting every day, but I can't. I'm sorry. It's not the same. I can look at people and actually see people and not have to see them, with that. And I think it's just the way I was raised. And with my late grandmother, she was a traditional lady and she was a medicine lady too. I want to think of her as an outside of the box thinker, because the people that she helped, I would have never thought that she would have helped different people of race. Traditionally, you see all medicine men, they help just one, and it's only us. But with her, it didn't matter. If they came to her for help, she would help. So I feel like I attribute my everything to her.
When people say, I'll see people comment and say, what is the world coming to, when in regard to, racism, it's the world didn't change. It's the same. It's been here. It's just being recorded. It's being like, people have their phones and they're recording, like people are just being, it's the tension, the spotlight is being shined on it more just because of, social media. But yeah, nothing's changed. It's the same, if not worse.
Absolutely.
How about you, Melanie?
I think for me, I love culture, and I love the differences that we all have and share, and similarities that we all have and share. I love learning about different cultures and interacting with different individuals. So when people say that I don't see color, or we're all one race, we might be, but we all are individual. Just like we have 3 different children, we tune to each of their needs, because one might be a little bit more sensitive, so we're going to talk to them and approach them in a different way. One might be a little more outgoing, so our interaction with them is going to be different. So we're all unique, and I would not want all of our uniqueness to be taken away because we're all one human race, right? Another, I had this incident in a gas station one time where I was pumping gas in Arizona, and there's this guy behind a pump next to me, and he was talking to another person along the way, they were talking about the Redskins logo and how I don't understand why it's racist and people are just crying about it. And so I went around the pump and I was like, hey, excuse me. It's like, I'm Native American and I do find it racist. And I want to share with you why. And he just went on attack right then and there. And he got defensive and he got loud and he used the excuse as, well, I'm half Filipino, and he used a racial slur that I did not know of. And I don't find, if you can call me that and I wouldn't find it racist. And I was like, that's fine. That might be your perspective, but I'm sharing you my perspective. And he was like, get out of here. You don't know what you're talking about, you know, and he got in his car and left. And I was so riled up. My kids were in the car with me. And so they're like, whoa, what happened? And so I was like, it's like frustrated. And I told them what happened. And I said, that's not right. That people, you're trying to express your feelings, and this is your chance to ask a Native American why it would be offensive. And so what I would want people to know or hear is be empathetic, you know, put yourself, if you can't put yourself in our shoes, this is where you have that chance to try. This is where we can, just like right now, the community is behind the Black Lives Matter movement, is they're saying, I hear you and I see you and I see the pain and I want to help change. And that's all that I would want for everybody else, for other people, regarding whatever the fight is at that time. We are Native Americans. We have our own fights, water rights, stereotypical slogans and imagery, and those negative thoughts towards us, whether it's being alcoholics, whether it's being unhealthy, whether it's we're living off the government assistance, those things. If we're sharing with you what is hurtful or harmful, then I would appreciate some empathy. If you don't understand, we can have that discussion to share with you, and hopefully you will gain that understanding.
Absolutely.
And you know what I have to say to them? They know it's about race. They're the ones who created race in the first place. And so for you to point out that everything isn't about race, well, it wouldn't be if you never created it in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And if everything wasn't about race, different groups of people wouldn't be treated differently based off of the race that you created. The other thing that is crazy with the guy, well, I'm half this, and you know, if someone said this, I wouldn't be offended. It's like, probably because you've bought into white supremacy.
Yes.
This is what's going on here.
Mm-hmm.
And just because you don't find offensive because you would like to be somewhere more close to whiteness, doesn't mean that it dismisses that what you're saying is inappropriate and offensive in general. So,
Yes.
And they're also not identified by the blood quantum either.
exactly. So, well, thank you guys so much for joining me and having this conversation, this difficult conversation. But I feel like these type of conversations need to be had, and I'm glad that you guys got on here with me and were super honest about everything and just yourself. So
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.